Getting into underwater videography can be daunting, and especially when this involves trying to capture underwater wildlife, because now you have even less control over the situation. So I thought it would be appropriate to list a couple of tips and tricks on how to get into underwater videography involving wildlife. Well, hello guys, and welcome back to another episode on the Dive Saga channel. Over the last few years, we've been broadcasting a lot of videos that include underwater wildlife, from octopus to sharks to manta rays and so forth. And while a lot of that is luck, there is a little bit of technique involved. Now, me personally, I'm a very DIY filmmaker, so I do a lot of things myself. I figure out a lot of things myself, and the whole Dive Saga YouTube channel is mostly me. There are some episodes where we do have external cameramen or camera women who help us make the episodes look a little bit more three-dimensional, but chances are, if you click on a random episode, it is usually me and my underwater camera. So I figured it would be appropriate to share a couple of those tips on how to frame and how to capture underwater wildlife in a way that is engaging and maybe just a little bit better than what you're currently doing. If that video is for you, and if you like the Dive Saga channel, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, ask your questions, and maybe also consider subscribing to the Dive Saga channel, because we do shoot and air new episodes every 2 weeks. I don't often shoot in my office right here, but for this one I really wanted to have my editing setup and kind of go through a little bit of footage to explain some of the points that I wanted to talk about. And my first point is very much and absolutely the camera choice, because chances are, if you're getting into underwater filmmaking, underwater videography, that your very first camera looks something like this. It's probably an action camera, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm very much a fan of just getting your hands on whatever camera you can and start practicing. Yeah, this is not me saying that a GoPro is just as good as other cameras that you might be shooting on, but you do want to get practicing as quickly as possible, and a GoPro is a great start. In fact, right here, this is my very first, maybe not my first underwater shot, but the first time that I realized, okay, you know what, shooting underwater wildlife is kind of exhilarating, because if an animal decides to kind of pose for your lens and decides to just be there and lets you capture it, then that's very, very exhilarating. You kind of see here that I had a handheld torch and was kind of trying to illuminate the octopus. The image is maybe not super sharp, and you can actually tell that there is a bit of smearing on the edges right there. So that's because GoPro is very wide angle. It's not really made to do macro photography or videography, getting close. That's not what it's for, just because the focal length of these wide angle lenses, it really only starts like 3-4 feet or so, but anything closer than that, there is just no way to get a sharper image. They do sell some lenses which then also typically have a fixed focal length that you can put in front, but that doesn't really matter. I mean, this is another good example of an anemone where you see again the smearing on the edges where it gets blurry, but you do get the idea of how close is maybe the maximum you can get. And I am a big fan of starting to practice as soon as you can. However, if you do want to get proper macro, if you properly want to get closer to your subject, then you might have to invest in a camera that is a little bit more than just a wide angle action cam. It doesn't have to be an expensive SLR, but you probably want to get something that has automatic or manual focus, where you can actually move the focal point and try to get something up close. So when we look at this close-up over here, that is something that you simply could not shoot with a GoPro. You see how the background is all nice and blurry and our subject is all nice and crisp. For that, you will need a camera with a lens that is capable of doing that. So I'm not saying that you have to go and run to the store and buy the most, crazy specialized camera, but understand the limitations. Yeah, this triggerfish over here, it would have been maybe like a funny and cool shot, but of course the triggerfish is all out of focus, and that's super normal because the camera is not equipped to do that. But don't shoot things like this and then think, oh, I suck at underwater filmmaking, I suck at capturing animals. Chances are the camera you're using is simply not equipped to do that. So if you are, let's say, trying to make something involving nudibranchs, you probably need something that allows you to get a little bit closer. Yeah, in that case, it's not you, it's the camera. And with that in mind, when you are getting started, and especially when you're trying to get into wildlife videography underwater specifically, so things like fish, you're going to need to get practice. So yes, there's a lot of amazing underwater filmmakers out there, and there's amazing footage out there involving sharks and manta rays and whales. However, you do not need to wait until you have those amazing encounters to start sharpening your knives. It is very important to start practicing those skills on just a really small scale. Practice on what you can find. Wherever it is you live and dive, whatever your home reef is, just practice, right? So even in my case, I mean, you might just take the camera out and just see what you can get, right? Try practicing capturing the right angle, getting close to the ground, how you breathe, how you approach this wildlife. You can do that with almost anything on any reef, and you may be surprised how quickly your skills actually grow if you just put a little bit of time in. This is not, it's not a good idea even to wait until you're going on that amazing expensive dive trip and then be surprised if the images don't turn out the way you wanted them to be. So practice on very simple subjects as much as you possibly can. Now, when it does come to those maybe more spectacular shots and your manta rays like we had here in the Maldives, or your sharks, a lot of that is actually patience and also luck. You cannot really force shots like this, right? It is a little bit being in the right place in the right time, but it is also to do with just diving a lot and having a little bit of luck. Many underwater filmmakers, especially when they first start out, you'll see a lot of fish sort of from behind. You'll just see the tail and the fish swimming away, and it's just a series of shots like that. And there's nothing wrong again with practicing, but those probably aren't the things you want to see. You probably want to see the wildlife coming towards you, and you want to get those nice sweeping shots. But for instance, this beautiful manta ray encounter we had right here, yes, the manta ray is just circling in front of my camera, but it was luck. I did not grab the manta ray by its tail and spin him around. This was the animal being willing to do that. So what you can also do, and this is an extra tip here, is learn a little bit about the wildlife you're likely to encounter and how they behave and how they might behave. Because the last thing you want to be doing is staging these shots, chasing these animals, or even worse, ending up with a video that is just, the hind part of the animals. So it does involve a little bit of patience and a little bit of anticipating where an animal might go and being in the right spot, right? Same thing with sharks. You don't want to put yourself in harm's way. You don't want to try and manipulate what the animals are doing, but you can look at their behavior and anticipate where you think they might be going. And that's not always going to work, but the more you work with these animals, the more you may actually get an idea of how they might behave. I think this is actually a good example of one of those cases. That's a mobile array in the Azores. And so again, we didn't really do anything. The mobile arrays just come to you, and it really is just a matter of being a little bit lucky. The mobile array just coming close to us, checking us out, and there even being a moment of pause between us and checking each other out. But that's organic. That's obviously not forced. And that is super important to understand that. Another piece of advice that you may need, and that is actually a very overarching and generally applicable piece of advice for underwater videography and photography involving wildlife or otherwise, is just try to get to the eye level or a little bit below your subject. So if you are just shooting down, top down, you're going to get a very flat image. But for instance here, the turtle encounter, what we do try to do to enhance the shot is just try to get a little lower without of course damaging the environment, and try to get a little bit of an upwards angle so that the blue background can create a little bit of depth. That always makes for a much nicer image. And again, as you can see here with the turtle, the shot lasts as long as the turtle wants it to last, and when the turtle leaves, in my case, the shot is over. I think it's also important to sometimes just let things naturally end, let a shot naturally come to a close, and it can, depending on whatever story you're telling or whatever video you're making, it can be nice for the animal to just leave the frame and that is it, as opposed to you keep panning, now swimming, and you know, you end up with that from behind shot. That's very difficult to cut, because now you're in the middle of an action that's kind of going nowhere because you probably won't win the chase. And especially if all your shots look like that, now it becomes almost like a style that is not very nice. And it speaks a little bit more to animal behavior, I think, sometimes, to just kind of let them cruise off when they're done with you. And then the last tip I would give, and something that people probably struggle with a bit, is to just keep your shots steady and to get enough screen time. And there's a very simple trick, and you can actually find it on a lot of my videos, both me applying it but also me advising it. And that is, well, you have to learn to shoot steady. There's not really an alternative for that. But what you can also do is drastically increase your frames per second. Yeah, if you increase your frame rate to, for instance, 120 frames per second, when you then play that back at 30 frames a second, you now have shots that last 4 times as long. So if we have a look here, this is just a blue shark encounter, but it is slowed down, so we just get a long, nice, swooping shot of the shark swimming by us. If we would have played that back at regular speed, because we shot it at regular speed, it would be over in no time. So what that means is sometimes encounters just are quite short. Yeah, so here's one where we get a beautiful close-up, in my opinion anyways, of the eyeball rotating, and then the gills, who are paper thin, the fins. So it's just again a nice sort of sweeping shot that really displays the animal very well, but it is only able to be this stable and slow because it's been shot like that. So that is something, of course, in the case of sharks, for instance, you do also have to interpret a bit their behavior. And I mean, blue sharks are fairly pacifist sharks, let's say, when it comes to human-shark interactions. So it's a little easier to just let it cruise by you, yeah? But again, having that high frame rate really helps quite a bit. And you should also not always necessarily aim to be right there or right with them. This is a good example of a shark just swimming overhead. We have the sunlight behind it, nice and slow. It's almost like a silhouette. We have the water reflections. So sometimes shots can just be a little bit more stylistic and really useful still. So that would be my couple of underwater wildlife cinematography tips and tricks. If you start with those and just practice, then you may be surprised at what results that you will get. I thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the Dive Saga channel if you like content like this. Maybe check out some of our cool new merch as well if you're into that kind of thing. Shameless promotion, and I will see you next time.